Thanks for tuning into today's podcast. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our new remote training here at RPP. We've been offering remote training for quite some time, but we always required the athlete to come in-house for an assessment. Now we can do the whole assessment online and bring all of our services, pitching, hitting, and strength training to your doorstep. So, if you like what we do and how we do it, go to our website at rocklandpeakperformance.com and click on Remote Training in the toolbar. Thanks. The Behind the Seams podcast. I'm your host, Nunzio Signore, looking to bring you great dialogue with some of the best in the world of player development. The world of training baseball players has changed dramatically during the past few years, and I'm looking forward to shedding some light here on what's the latest, what's the best, and what's really happening in the world of player development. Thanks for joining me for the ride. It's always so funny to talk to you, man. You're one of the guys that just seems to just let it all hang out and always make me laugh. I think sometimes doing these podcasts, I'm interviewing all these very serious people, and I'm a very serious guy and you're a very serious guy, but I think that I had mentioned to you and your wife before, how's Mandy doing? Good?
She's good, thank you.
Good. Yeah. I mentioned to you and your wife before that you remind me very much of myself. Like, you're a hippie, you know what I mean? And think that it's a very you just say shit and it's really funny. It's and I really appreciate that. I was talking to that with Alan Yeager about that too. I consider him like the same kind of guy,
He's awesome.
Just letting it all hang out. Hey guys, welcome to the Behind the Seams podcast. I'm Nunzio Signore, and today we've got a good buddy of mine, Lantz Wheeler. Lantz is the founder and CEO of the baseball think tank and the inventor of the core velocity belt, and is absolutely no stranger to coaching pitchers. After 2 years of coaching at the JUCO level, he received a call from Lipscomb University and eventually ULM in Louisiana, where under his guidance, the Bison's pitching staff either led or was ranked among the top 3 in numerous pitching categories in the Atlantic Sun division in his final 3 seasons. He then moved to Nashville, where he began training pro ball players, and this is where the famed core velocity belt was born. Since then, Lantz continues to be a driving force amongst pitchers of all ages, from high school to pro ball. He continues to be a force on social media and hosts the ever-popular Pitch-a-Palooza every year in December, which I think is coming up very, very soon. Today, I wanted to kind of touch on a couple of what I would call Lantz-isms, things that he says a lot of times on social media that I think nobody explains, obviously better than himself, and get some explanations on them. So today, we're sitting down and talking to the man himself, Lantz Wheeler, man. What's up, Lantz?
Man, glad to be here. Glad to be here. It's awesome.
And great to see you. And before we even start, there have been a few times in my career I have watched the progress of my business and my reputation grow. And one of the biggest ones was continually speaking at Pitch-a-Palooza every year, and Lantz giving me that platform. And I just want to openly thank you for that, because that continues to be something that I have just pivoted off of. And if anybody hasn't ever seen it, it's quite it's quite an extravaganza, and I highly recommend that you check it out. But thank you, Lantz, for that.
Oh, you're welcome, man. That's what it's all about. Thank you for saying that. That's awesome.
Yeah, man. So I first want to go into a little more detail about your path. I kind of touched base on it, but when I kind of looked you up, it was really, really interesting about how in the trenches you started, where, sleeping in a 15 by 15 dorm room. And I think it's important for young listeners out there to be aware of how the grind can be when you're just starting out. It's not just like graduate from school, learn some stuff, and start rolling. Can you just talk a second about that? Because it really blew my mind, especially with a child. It was inspiring, to say the least.
Yeah, well, thanks, man. And it's crazy looking back through this. I had started I'd gotten my degree in exercise phys out of Morehead State. And like everybody, I thought I was going to start right in management. And man, I got a shitty job. I got stuck. And 3 months later, I'm questioning my life, thinking, what am I doing? But at this point, I had just graduated. I was my daughter, Riley, who is 24 now, Jesus. It was me and her. I was a single dad. So originally, I'd started as a high school coach. My best friend got the job, and he asked me to volunteer. So I'm like, yeah, let's give this a shot. But at the end of the year, man, I'm digging through change for McDonald's for the dollar menu, and just couldn't do this. And so it was funny how it all works out, man. It was the last weekend of the year in that high school. And I was sitting up in the press box, and I'm talking to this guy. We're talking pitching, and the 7th inning is over, and he says, "Hey, man," he offers me the financial opportunity of a lifetime. He goes, "Hey, man, I need a pitching coach here at St. Catherine. Would you be interested?" He said, "It pays $350 a month, but you get to live in the dorm." I'm thinking, man, I'm not going to tell him, but I'm going to steal that. That's a steal. So I said, "Yeah, man, I'll take that." So it was Riley and I. We were living in that dorm, and this was probably 2003. And you know something, man, that was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, because at this point, man, I'd never really coached pitchers, and I'd never really had a pitching coach. So I'm starting to question everything I do. Like, man, do I know this stuff? And so that was the time I was actually started to look into all the pitching as we know it today with ASMI and Tom House and all those other guys. And during that time, what I would do is I would spend hour after hour in a computer lab, literally with a blanket on the floor with Riley sleeping on this floor. And it was like 12 to 2 o'clock in the morning because nobody was there. I could get the computer lab by myself. And so then afterwards, I would take all this information, like I religiously journal. I've got over 400 now that I just keep beside me. And I was just writing my notes, but I'm trying to make sense of this. So what I would do is, bless Riley's heart. She's living in a JUCO dorm, by the way. And so she's a 4-year-old, live in the JUCO
Guys,
dorm.
I just want to explain as a father to anyone who's not a father out there to hear that. That is inspiring. You don't even realize how tough that is. And you know what that else is? That nothing could be more gasoline to put on your fire to get out of that situation.
That's 100% right. Yeah, you're absolute. Context shapes content. And, you know, it was a lot of what I learned during that period. That's what I'm still talking about today. But the first thing that I learned, man, is that it's about communication. To me, the best coaches are the best. It doesn't matter what I know or how much I know. It's how much are you able to communicate in a way that he can understand. And I noticed that right away, because I would come out to the field and I'm taking all this information I'm learning and I'm speaking in a way that they have no idea what I'm talking about. And so it was at that point I would take all this information and I would try to turn it into stories so I could explain it to my daughter. So I would talk about postural stabilization, dynamic balance. And instead of talking about it with pitching, I would talk about it like, well, Cinderella has to be home at 12. When she hits the front brakes, it stops and it shoots the momentum. So here I am telling Tom House bedtime stories, and you wonder why my daughter has no idea or no interest about the game of baseball. But that's really how it started. So it was just me and her for those 2 years. And then right after that, I had met Mandy, and we took another job, and that was a volunteer job to come and work at Lipscomb for 80 hours a week to get paid absolutely nothing. But you know, looking back, it's exactly what you said. Like whenever you have to go through that, it's motivation. And then looking back 100%. On it too, man, it's the power of belief. Like I was naive enough to think that I could be one of 250 Division I coaches. Had I known the odds, I would have probably vacated instead of been motivated. But that's just kind of how it all worked out.
It's just unbelievable. You move to Nashville and you invent this thing called the core velocity belt, which I use and half the country uses all the time. And you invented, I'm going to start going through some of these phrases that you use, and I'd like you to explain them. I thought that you use so many of them. I'm like, this is going to be a great podcast, because I'm just going to mention them and you're going to talk about them. So of course, the biggest one, ride the slide. First of all, how did that phrase come about? You know, guys riding the slide, he's going to talk about it. It's basically, you know, resisting rotation as you hinge forward, mirroring the surface. Talk about that a little bit, ride the slide, and how it came about.
Yeah, you know, at the time, it was always there was two schools of thought. There was drop and drive, there was stay tall and fall. But, you know, some of the things that I had noticed, that the quickest, you want to make sure nobody ever uses their lower half, tell them to stay tall. Because the guy that's going to stay tall is going to do exactly that. But when you're watching, like this, when we made the move out, about the time we was making the move out to California, so you see all these skaters and skateboarding, something that really fascinating. I could go on and on about that culture and what I've learned from skating and taken to the pitching world. But whenever you're watching those skaters, as they start to, they'll ollie up onto a rail and they'll mirror that slide all the way down. And so I was actually working with Casey Mize and Gunnar Leje one day and looked over, and how the belt was set up, the cord was hooked behind his butt. So as he lifted, it looked as if his glute was just going on a slide, almost like an escalator handrail, or what was the old lady that had the wheelchair? Maybe it wasn't Where's the Beef, but she had the wheelchair that was kind of going up.
Going up the ramp.
Yeah. So that's kind of where ride the slide came from. It was just my way of making sense of what I was seeing.
So what about strength and mobility issues? What do you attack as a pitching coach when the hinge is not, when a guy's having a hard time riding the slide? That's a big part of what the belt is about. Is to give them proprioceptive, to give them that like trust what you feel, that feel. What do you suggest for guys that, you know, younger athletes that just might not have, or older guys that have the strength and mobility, or may not have the strength and mobility? How do you think outside of the box when maybe we plug in the core velocity belt and they're still having a hard time riding the slide?
Well, I think that when we look at ride the slide, it's almost like a math problem. There's several steps leading up to that. I'd seen, like you're discussing the hinge. Like, I think that most players that I've run into, it's not a strength or a mobility issue, it's an awareness issue. They're just not aware of the middle of their body, especially American kids with our culture. And you know, something that's really neat too, like you can go to different parts of the country, and just like my Southern accent, there's a different movement dialect to each region with the climates that I've noticed. But with the hinge, I think most of the time it's just they're not aware of their body. A lot of these guys, what I refer to, they hinge at the knees, where they will just squat. And so what we do is we don't do anything until they can hinge. We're not even getting on the belt.
That's what I was actually getting at. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. I mean, because we're going to teach them how to hinge, and then we would actually use the belt to teach, but we're not going to throw
to move with that hinge.
Yes. And one of my favorite ways to teach the hinge is just, I'm big on I think an internal focus to external, but I think at first you have to feel it. You have to think about what you're doing through a very deep, deliberate practice. But some of the things that I've seen to teach a hinge is use a laser pointer. You can take a laser pointer and put it right at their hips. And if they're to hinge, that laser pointer will bring the red light towards their feet. If they're to squat, the red light stays on the wall. So it's pretty cool how they take their external focus and they're watching outside their body to have this goal to move the light towards them, and suddenly they start to hinge. But when I've seen, I think most of the time it's either proprioception, it's their perception of the movement, or it's their purpose. They think they're doing it right, they're just doing it wrong on purpose.
Right. I also found that it's really, you know, you can't expect really young kids to get into a great hinge until they develop some core strength. I mean, that core strength is what enables you to actually hold that hinge. Everyone focuses, got to get your big lower half, got to get a big lower half. I do agree you need a big lower half, but until you get your core strong, you're just going to have a big lower half. It's like you're still not going to hinge.
That's exactly right. It's kind of like have mass, throw gas, and the dude eats it. McDonald's, he's up to 260 70 miles an hour.
Yeah, and he's got no rate of force development. So next, posture determines positions. Please explain that.
Yeah, we're always talking about the middle of the body, proximal to distal, and when we're talking about rotational sport, it requires a fixed point. And so posture is the first point for us. Like we're talking about anchoring the eyes and the feet. We want to be a hammock because we're trying to move through the body move through the middle of the body. Like you had just said, with the stability and pelvic control, like so many guys struggle with that. But my posture and where the middle of my body, the center of my gravity, my head is going to determine the positions. So that's really what we're focused on, is just movement quality through the middle and just allowing the positions to take care of themselves. If I can control posture, the positions will be determined by that.
So what is a great drill that you would use for helping to control posture? Being
aware of the middle of their body. Another one are the eyes, because the body's going to follow the eyes. I learned this in skating, and this is where I kind of got this concept, is that when I was learning to skate, I was trying to do something that I could just submerge myself in another activity I knew nothing about, but it'd be something I could share with my kids. And so this would give me a better understanding when I'm working with a guy. How do I explain something I've never experienced before? So that was the whole reason. What I started to see with the skateboards is, number one, you have to keep your eyes out in front of you, because when you would shift your eyes, the weight would shift on the feet. Now the middle of my body starts to move. Now I'm wobbling. Now I'm the old 40-year-old about to give the thumbs up on the gurney. Don't want to be that guy. That's what we're talking about with anchoring the eyes and the feet, is if it's just like a hammock. In order to sway or move through the middle of the body, I have to have both sides anchored. And that's something a lot of guys struggle with. And one of the biggest problems I see with the lower half are the eyes, because guys will start to look down. As they start to look up, they'll just go into hip extension. Another thing that you'll start to see is guys with the feet, they're either their shoes are too loose and they're sliding, they're moving around just a little bit, or they're not set up on the mound according to their foot structure or foot type. And as those feet become unplugged, we always say that clues show up in shoes, because if you can watch what the shoes are going to do, it's going to give you an idea of the weight shift.
That's
And
huge.
so we're always, yeah. And that's the thing about pitching. When you're looking at mechanics, everybody focuses on the symptom. If I see a problem with the foot and it's unstable, most guys are thinking about the foot rather than what's causing that foot to be unstable. Is it the hips? Is it the eyes? Is it setup? Because there's always something you can track it back to.
We tell our guys all the time, dude, do me a favor, man, before we start, tie your shoes.
Please.
It's like every kid walks in here with his shoes. You can look at his laces and I'm like, dude, you're not going to be able to dig into the floor. It's like there's no way you're going to be able to dig into the floor with those shoes. And you can see them, their shoes moving. Some of them throw and their shoes come off. It's like, I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you remember when you talk about the body following the head and the head follow the eyes? Do you remember when I sent you a martial art? I sent you a martial art video. You were like, dude, where did you get that video? I studied martial arts for a long time, and whenever you wanted to guide an athlete to go wherever you want him to go, you grab his head, and the body has no option but to follow where the head goes. And then on a grander scheme, the eyes are something that you can control without, like, you can't grab a guy's head when you're teaching him the pitch, but if you can get him to focus his eyes in a position, it will send the head there, which will send the body there.
100%. And there's another example, just that postures determines positions there.
Right, exactly. Most often, unstable feet are caused by low levels of pelvic control. That's what you said. Can you give me an example?
They just don't have the stability to be able to keep their feet plugged in. They don't have the control of the middle to be able to compress the feet or stay in the feet. And
I agree 100% with that. In mocap, I know I don't know if you have a mocap or you read mocaps, but in my lab, I look at mocaps, and one of the biggest things that we see that correlates to how hard a guy throws is his pelvic speed and where his pelvis sits to set up that spine angle to throw from. So I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted you to
posture determines positions right there.
That's another, So basically what happens is posture determines positions is basically the header of all these subtitles that we're going through.
Right.
Right. Very, very, very interesting. Let me go through. Funnel the front. This is great. I love this concept of getting better extension through lead hip rotation. Talk about funnel the front, because I agree with you 100% on this, and I have a concept about how guys teach. They're so concerned about that front leg completely getting straight. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah, with two things. One, I'm going to go ahead with the because you can remind me of the funnel the front, because if not, I'll forget about what I'm getting ready to say right now.
Right.
But with that lead leg blocking, you see so much of that, and that's kind of the problem. Is I've been there before, and I know that early on I was looking at these positions, and I wasn't thinking about the cause and effect, and that movement has consequences, right? And so a big one is plane of rotation. So when you're talking about that front leg or lead leg block, you take a guy like Garrett Cole, who's going to be much more over the top, who's going to have much more of a north-south. Well, obviously, he's going to have more lead extension as opposed to a lower side or a lower slot guy, say Hader or someone like that. So a lot of it is based on your plane of rotation, because that's the momentum. A guy that's moving north-south obviously is going to lock.
Right.
But with funnel the front, that's where I'd gotten the concept of the logo for the core velocity belt. And it's where the front leg braces, and then that front side is just that back hip's rotating around a firm front hip. And then with the shoulders, we're gaining that extension via rotation. But that's something I like to watch when I'm watching guys. One of my favorite things to watch in a video is how the body unwinds after the throw. I think that tells you as much as anything, is what direction, what momentum does the body go after you release the ball, because a ball of yarn is going to wind up, or it's going to unwind however it was wound up. So another one, that's just another clue whenever we're evaluating, is we're watching that funnel the front, because if they can get that and they can rotate through the ball, then they had to be pretty good leading up to that point.
I see all the time guys who we look at them on video when we're watching them throw, and Their post up looks like the classically beautiful post up, almost to the point where it's so deep that it gets into hyperextension of the front leg. And they're not really throwing that hard. And I'm like, wow, this looks like a textbook post up. But what happens is they're posting up, but they're really not getting around. They're not letting their pelvis get around that femur. So they're not actually getting out in front of the ball. Their vertical break suffers. Everything happens because they can't get out in front. They can't put leverage on the ball. It makes them cut the ball, even though they have a really great post up. Like MoCap always says, lead leg angular velocity, lead leg angular velocity. I have seen lead leg angular velocity correlate, but I have also seen guys who post up ridiculously quick that it doesn't correlate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're so quick to post up that they're throwing standing up, like you said. You know, they're throwing standing up and they cut the ball. So I think that from a velocity standpoint, there's plus and minus. There are no absolutes, right?
Right.
Even more important for me is I find that if you just coach posting up, a lot of kids will kick that foot back instead of realizing that they need to anchor it and rotate around. And what happens is you get more extended amount of time on the ball, and you also have a lot more time to decelerate your arm so you don't slam shut.
100%, yeah.
Right. I know you're a big lower half guy. Is there ever a time when you don't address the lower half first? And if so, when?
Every time. Like the lower half is just something we go to. The first place we're going to address as a person. Like I'm just a big believer in getting to know who are you talking to, because your purpose would affect movement, right? We're always talking about the form, and then we got smart. We're talking about the functioning of the body and how it's moving and what it's doing. But form follows function. Function follows purpose. So if I know that player's purpose, and his purpose is to post up, and he thinks that's the most important thing, where you're going to start to see things like that because that's his purpose, right? Another one would be, well, man, this guy he can't really get in the lower half. Well, why are you telling him to stay tall? If you're going to tell a guy to stay tall, he's going to be very passive with his lower half. So getting to know what's important to them is where we're going to start, because again, form follows function, function follows purpose. Another big part of that is their perception of the movement. You take a player, like say from the Northeast versus California, and their perception of the lower half, I might ask them, hey, what's it like to push a car out of the snow? Well, they're going to know right away that I can't just push from the side. I'm going to have to get into the ground.
Right.
So it's finding ways to relate to them. But first, we're going to start with that brain. We're going to get their idea of their perceptions, their history of cues, their purpose, what they've been told, what advice they've been given that they value. Because if a player comes to work on his lower half and Nolan Ryan says, hey, man, you've got to scrunch your big toes, and the pitching coach says something different, well, obviously Nolan Ryan's advice might weigh a little bit more. So no matter what your pitching coach is trying to do, if he still thinks what Nolan Ryan is saying is the most important, there's no drill that's ever going to fix that.
Exactly.
So because we call it our motion picture. What's their motion picture look like? And then through our history of this stuff that we're gathering, we call it an emotion analysis is what we're doing. So we're really starting with the brain. We're getting their perception, their purpose, their history of cues. And then plus what you'll see a lot of times, if you'll start to get information like that, Nunja, you'll see what their delivery looks like before you ever see them make a throw. Another one is knowing who they follow on social media. That's a big one too, because movement leaves clues, and all these are just footprints into what's the final product that you're seeing. So a lot of times, man, what's cool is if you can change their perception, you just change their pattern instantly without ever picking up a ball. Because it's that picture that they're using as their representation or model to be able to follow. And a lot of times what they think they're doing is not exactly what they're doing. And then sometimes they're doing it wrong on purpose. So an example of how I got to that was Dr. Seal's kid. I'm working with this kid. It's probably 2015 and really good at the drills. And then we get on the mound and he just couldn't do it. So I'll go back to the drills. Another 30 minutes, come back to the mound. He couldn't do it. And then I finally asked him, I said, Tyler, man, are you trying to finish in fielding position? He's like, well, yeah, thought that's what you wanted me to do. Well, no, don't. And then everything worked, but it was just changing that picture in his head that changed the pattern. It wasn't a movement deficiency. It was a perceptual problem on how he viewed the movement or purpose of what he was supposed to do.
And where he thought he had to finish was affecting everything upstream.
Yes.
Right. Another thing that I like to point out is a lot of kids sometimes, like you said, you can tell how a kid throws by what he looks like on social media, what he's looking at on social media. Yeah. And, while Tim Lincecum, nobody can deny the greatness of Tim Lincecum, having a kid just mirror Tim Lincecum's mechanics because Tim Lincecum throws hard, and that goes a long way to you can almost see how a guy throws just by the facilities that he's coming out of as well.
Yes, all this is clues, man.
Yeah, it drops clues. And I agree. I 100% agree with fixing the lower half first. Some people like to fix the upper. I mean, even one of my pitching coaches, he likes to address the upper the arm first. And I'm like, sometimes, like, dude, try to change the arm. He thinks it's the easiest, the quickest thing to change. Okay, I'm going to give you that. So just try to change that for a minute. But let me just say something. Don't spend too long on that, because if you're trying to change the arm and it works, kudos to you. If it doesn't work, start to go down below, because that's really honestly, it's the thing that happens first, and it's the thing that happens the slowest, right? It's the easiest to see discrepancies. You can see a kid's ankle before he even, at leg lift, right? So, good for checking the lower half first. Okay, here we go. Throwing drills. You've said, in my opinion, the reason pitchers need pitching drills is because of all the pitching drills.
Yeah.
Shoot, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, man. I just see so many pitching drills out there that, number one, you can ask most players, why are you doing this? And they don't know. Right. Yeah, because it's your intention that shapes the drill. They don't know that there's no purpose. And I always compare this, coming from Kentucky, like basketball. Imagine if you shot a basketball, but there was no nets, there was no backboard, there's no rim, and you weren't sure there was a goal. You're just throwing a ball up there, and you've got a coach from the other side of half court. I think it went in. There's no feedback. That would be like trying to gather feedback in the middle of while you're driving. You say, hey, Lance, on the way home, you averaged 14.3 miles per hour. Well, awesome. Why'd I get a ticket for doing 60 in a school zone? Well, it doesn't tell me everything, right?
Right.
So with the drills, man, I think so many of the drills are what's causing so much of the problems. And I could go on and on about some of the drills that I think cause the most problems. But really, to me, man, at the end of the day, I think the hinge, if I can get in the ground, I can move the center. The chain works proximal to distal. So if I can get that first move, and I can clean up and move well through the middle, everything else is going to take care of itself. But I think with all the drills, I think that causes so many problems. I believe, I'm a big believer, I think most pitching problems are man-made. I think that they wouldn't exist had it not been for confusion, miscommunication, perception. So I think that the delivery should be the drill, because that's where so many guys struggle. And then you see all these other drills. I've just yet to see one that transfers.
So how about this, though? How about building the autonomy with the athlete so he understands why he's doing a particular drill, and make sure that movement is taken care of first, so that when he is doing the drill, he not only is doing it correctly, but he knows why he's doing it. So it kind of knocks out what you're talking about.
I would agree with it. Yeah. And
so you're down with that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's just
so you're not saying, listen, dude, nobody should do pitching drills. You just need to know why you're doing them. They need to be warranted, and the guy needs to be able to get into the positions.
100%. Yeah, just knowing what he's doing. But the idea of just seeing this drill and no purpose,
yeah, plastering a drill over everything.
Right on.
Right.
Yeah.
I can get with that, because we do use drills. We use them after we have them up on a table. We look at ranges of motion. We try to fix what we need to fix. And we ask the athlete, why are you doing this drill? We explain to them why they're doing this drill. If they can't answer why they're doing that drill, that's just a bad look. You know what I mean?
100%.
So okay, cool.
Want to give players freedom. If they believe something works, man, the power of belief, wow.
100%.
There's no chance I would ever take that away from a player, man.
So
I don't agree with it.
The power of belief. So check this. This is a great explanation for coaches. So I one time was coaching an athlete on the floor, and he was looking at me, and 2 days later, his movement looked great. I said, dude, you did exactly what I told you to do. And he said, the way you tell me to do it and your body function, I can tell you really believe in what you're telling me. So it gives me no choice but to actually feel like that has to be the right thing to do.
That's awesome.
So for for coaching, if you have to really believe in what you're doing. If you're just doing it because you saw somebody else doing it, you're kind of half delivering that, because your passion with it can't possibly be as good as if you really, really deep down in your loins, you really feel like this is going to work,
Your plums, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
No, but you're on that right there. That's something I'd like to expand on a little bit. Is people sometimes we forget that demonstration is probably the purest form of communication and teaching. And so a lot of times you'll see a guy that's doing something wrong, and then you'll look at the guy that's showing him, and he's doing it exactly like what he was shown, right?
Yeah.
Because I always go back to the kids, and remember this Volkswagen commercial came out that was my very first Pitch-a-Palooza presentation. The guy's throwing to his son in the front yard, and he's jumping up in the air, and the son's throwing it right back to him. And this was about the time I was with Rex. I had the two girls first, and then with Rex, I was like, you know what? I'm having a 10-year project. I'm not going to tell Rex a single thing. There's no.
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. And it was, it was because of this stuff right here. And it was really, really cool how it all turned out. And I really started to find is get out of the way. I think our job as a coach is to communicate and shape the room. It's like the goldfish. If I want a bigger bowl, a bigger fish, I'm going to give them a bigger bowl. But a lot of times just by altering or adjusting the room or the environment, you can start to just make changes.
So I'm going to talk about Palooza a little bit, but after this. But one last question. I think sometimes, because I know you, and I know that you're like, hey, dude, if that works for you, use it. I think sometimes you get a rap sometimes for being anti-tech because of your posts, and knowing you, I know that that's not the case. So just for the listeners out there, please explain your position on using data with pitchers. I think people sometimes think that, if there's any data being used at all, you're like thumbs down.
Yeah, with data, obviously you'd be a fool to think that there's no data being used. The thing that I have with the data is a couple. Number one is that when we think data, the sounds, how a pitcher took a pitch, how the umpire called it, where it was, that's all data. And I think sometimes people forget that there's data that's constantly, it's just information that we're gathering and we're accumulating and putting together. But the thing that I see with pitching is how data is used. That's the problem with me, is that when I look at data, we're looking at real-time data because we're trying to connect a feel or an association for the result, right? And it goes back to my basketball analogy that whenever I'm shooting basketball, I get that immediate feedback right away. There's no gray area. You either win or you lose. It was to the right, it was to the left, but you're getting this feedback. And then because I get this immediate feedback over time, it creates an association or a feel for the result there. So, but the problem with tech is that often it's in retrospect. Like if I was going out and I was driving and you rented a car and I rented the exact same car, and we came back and said, all right, Nunzio, you averaged 84 miles per hour. Lance, you averaged 62. You must be a bad driver. Well, if I never asked you, well, Nunzio, you went to race from the Pacific Coast Highway where I went driving in the mountains. Without that context, the content is useless. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is we just strip the data out of context and we just got this content available. So it doesn't tell the whole story. I think another part with the data is that they just group everybody together. And I just think it's on an individual basis. How we use data is that we use it like a fuse box and we're using it in real time. I'm not going back and averaging and saying, here's what this was. But what we're doing is with a fuse box, if I said, hey, Nunzio, I want you the bathroom lights out. You're not an engineer or electrician. So what would be your process for going about that? You'd go to the fuse box. What if I flip this? What if until you find it, and then we label it. So that's how we're using it. We're using it on an individual basis, and we're using it to try to connect a field versus in retrospect. And then another problem I have with data is that I'm just such a big believer that movement has consequences. And too often it's that very first move. It's their lift, it's their eyes, it's their purpose, it's their intention, it's the shifting of the feet. It's
what you can't get on data.
What you can't get on data, that's the most important. And so when you're not looking at that stuff, what I see is data leads them down to where they're thinking about positions. They're trying to get a longer stride because that's where the buckets are labeled. That becomes their purpose or their goal. And because if you look at data, most of pitching, and this goes back to all the reading and stuff I was saying about earlier in St. Catherine. And if you got time, I'll go more about that. But is that with the data, I lost my train of thought there, man, because I switched over. But yeah, it's just that first move. There's so many things that can't be captured in baseball. And because it can't be measured, it doesn't matter. Like, where are his eyes? What are his purpose? What's his intention? How did he lift? How did he move out? But when you look at it, if we're just taking everything at foot plant and this is how we're measuring guys, we're assuming that 100% of the guys arrived at foot plant the same exact way. 100% of the guys arrived at the foot plant with no problems 100% of the time. And the problems here is, oh, he doesn't have hip shoulder, so now he's got to get a hip shoulder drill, rather than looking upstream at what happened earlier. Because you take so many guys, you watch them watch a video and they're going frame by frame, they'll get to foot plant, and then they're just focused on from there. They're never thinking about what happened at the beginning, because nobody's ever really stressing it to them. And on social media, it's all lead leg block, it's all, front leg or whatever.
But what if you look at that angle at foot plant from a mocap review, and you're a more experienced coach that realized, okay, this is telling me I don't like what I'm seeing at foot plant angle wise here, so I need to go back and look further. Now I can't find anything further back. I know something further back is causing it. So now I find I'm all the way up to stride. Now I have no choice but to go back and think about the eyes, and go back and think about things that happen before a body movement, the intent, right? So that's cool. So you can use, what I'm saying is, I believe, this is my belief, I believe you can use mocap to give you, it puts down crumbs that you can go back and look for. And when you run out of space and you can't find anything else, you have to go into the air. You know what I mean?
You know what I think, that the thing with data is the mocap, because we use with Emily, as you know, Emily, we use it for all this testing, but mocap's in place to me to ask better questions. It's
exactly
not the final answer. And I think that's what a lot of guys do. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like, here's the information, here's the clues I've been given. I'm playing detective. So what if I looked here? So it's just going to be, there. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because it does help when you have two athletes and you're looking at mocaps, and like, this guy throws 94 and this guy throws 80, and they both have the same issue at foot plant. That's that same drive in the car at 86 and 63, and not knowing what zone you're driving in. So you do. So it's not that you got to. It's how you use the technology that is your issue, not just if you're logging everybody into one big category. Obviously that's just not the way to use it. I just wanted you to point that out, because I look on social media sometimes and they're always like, anything that has to do with tech you hate. I see them saying to you, what I mean? And I'm like, dude, that's like, I don't really think you're saying that. You know what I mean?
That's not even close. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's just how it's used.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let me ask you one more question. Can you tell me about how, for you guys who don't know anything about Pitch-a-Palooza, this is an extraordinary event. And, I've spoken at it numerous times, and it's always one of the highlights of the year. Can you tell me how this whole Palooza thing came about?
Yeah, man, it was like nothing I ever started was meant to or intended to be a business. And Palooza was no different. This was after I'd gotten finished with ULM, and it was in October of 2013. And after each season, college baseball season, I would reach out to guys that maybe I didn't know or really respected and like what they was doing. So I would go and I would speak with them to try to find ways to improve my staff the next year. So now that my coaching career was no longer available, what I did that October was like, you know what, I'd like to call Paul Nyman and Butch Thompson and Dave Serrano and some of these guys and see if they would come here and share it with everybody else. And so that's how it started in 2013. I think there was 8 speakers and 49 in attendance, and since that time it's just really taken off. But it was
it's amazing. The hang is great. So then my next question is, dude, why 75 people this year? This is like, you know how this is like, when I speak there's like 600 people. I mean, like, now you're going to go to 75. What's the thinking on that one?
Because Palooza was never about growing or making money. It was all about just sharing information, because it's discussions in the hallway, it's the relationships. And I felt like over the last 3 years, it gotten so big that I kind of lost touch with the essence of what it was about. And it was more about giving. It was more about relationships in the room and sharing. And so I wanted to, every other year, just kind of give that back, so that guys that want it to, they can sleep in the facility, they can just hang, they can eat bologna sandwiches, but it's just pitching guys, man, for 3 days like that. So I wanted to mix it up.
I respect that. That's really, really great. So when is this year's Palooza?
December 9th through the 11th. We're actually having it here in Huntington Beach, man. So
Beautiful. If you have never been to Huntington Beach, it's a beautiful place. I remember I was out there speaking at Eugene Bleeker's place when he was out there. And
now you're gonna be in San Diego here soon too, right? Or is
no,
you were on Zach's.
Yeah, I'm gonna be at Wake Forest December 17th and 18th. And Zach's is right now. So one more time, I can't tell you how much I love talking to you all the time. This is really like, it never seems like I'm really doing an interview when I talk to you. It always seems like I'm just talking to somebody, which is really refreshing in this profession that we're in. We've been talking to Lantz Wheeler from Baseball Think Tank, inventor of the core velocity belt and the founder of Pitch-a-Palooza as well. Lantz, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, especially the 3-hour difference and talking to me at 8:30 in the morning. It's really not big of you.
Well, I appreciate it, man. It's always good.
Awesome. So guys, how can they reach you, Lantz? On social media?
I'm at Lantz Wheeler on Twitter, also at Core Velo Belt. And then on Instagram, it's at the Core Velocity. No, it might be at Core Velocity Belt. I can't remember exactly what it's one of those two.
Awesome. Guys, check out the core velocity belt as well. We use it here at my facility all the time. And it really, you want to see guys kind of like use cueing and just immediately start to get it. I can't talk enough about it. For me, you can reach me on social media at Nunzio Signori on Twitter. You can reach my facility at RPP_baseball on both Twitter and Instagram. My website, www.rocklandpeakperformance.com. I have a book out on velocity-based training, how to apply science and data to maximize performance. You can get it on Amazon. Lantz, one more time, thank you again. We've been talking with Lantz Wheeler, and on the next time around, we'll see you guys. Take it easy.
That's a good job, man. You have personality for it too, man.